Hi, my name is Tim Hatcher. I've been interested in ethics and the way businesses treat not only employees, but the way they treat the environment and the community. I've been interested in that for a long, long time, and I used to teach that at several universities. I was a university professor for about 20 years, and currently I'm working as a director for the Marine Training and Education Center at Carteret Community College. Sort of come out of retirement to do that. It's a passion of mine. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what does it mean for an organization to be responsible, to be, whose interest, I guess is a good way to think about it, whose interest do companies serve? Do you believe that the only responsibility of a business is to increase its profit? Or do companies have responsibilities to us as employees, suppliers, customers? What about the communities that those companies do business in? Does a company have a responsibility to the environment, to not pollute, or to do damage to the ecosystem? And if the only responsibility is about profit, then profit at what cost? Does this mean a company can do whatever it wants as long as it's providing its owners or stockholders a profit? Think for a minute about the companies that you sort of gravitate to, the companies that you say, that's a good company. What is it about those companies that causes you to either like them or dislike them? Is it always just about money? About who can provide the cheapest stuff, regardless of how they achieve it? All companies, whether for-profit or non-profit, have responsibilities not only to those who own the company, like stockholders, but also to what are called stakeholders. There are many different types of stakeholders. Let's think about this for a minute. Obviously, company owners are stakeholders, workers, employees, customers, potential customers, suppliers, vendors that supply things to the company, trade associations, trade unions, of course citizens, everyone living in a town who may be affected by what that company does. For example, if a company contaminates the environment, and everybody in essence can suffer as a result of that, can't they? Creditors are also stakeholders, people who loan company money. Government entities, obviously, involved in regulation, taxation, things like that. Local businesses that cater to the company's employees, like restaurants and grocery stores and things like that. Places where employees' families do business are also stakeholders. Other companies, competitors, are also stakeholders, especially if they're in the same line of work. And because they're actually competing for market share. Other companies might find themselves subjected to things like new and potentially burdensome regulations. We hear about that a lot because that contamination I talked about caused by one company, now all of a sudden all the companies end up suffering as a result of it. And finally, a stakeholder that sometimes we don't think about, and that's the environment, the actual ecosystem, the physical environment. So each of these groups have different claims on a company, and they have a stake in its actions. That's why we call it stakeholders versus stockholders. So a company has some responsibility to each of these groups, but what is the legitimate claim on the business of each of these groups? Do they have a legitimate claim? What rights do they have with respect to the company's actions? What kind of responsibilities and obligations can they justifiably impose on a business? Stakeholder theory says this. It says, those whose lives are touched by a company hold a right and an obligation to participate in directing it. That's the central tenet of stakeholder theory. But why do you think a company should give due regard to the interest of all these different groups instead of just their stockholders? Addressing stakeholders addresses the principle of who or what really counts to a company. In the traditional view of a company, what we would call the shareholder view, only the owners or the shareholders, stockholders of the company are important. And the company obviously has a binding, what we call a fiduciary, and all that really means is you have an accountability in terms of money, that duty to put those needs first, the needs of the stockholders first, to increase the value for them. The board of the directors and officers of the company then have direct control over that corporation. So they have this fiduciary responsibility to those owners. But when we think about stakeholders, we're now taking into account that there are other parties involved, parties that do actually have a stake in the company. Whether or not the company considers it stakeholders can have a devastating outcome. Think about what stakeholders each of the companies that I'm getting ready to share with you is taking into consideration. So as I'm describing these companies, think about what stakeholders they are thinking about and what stakeholders they are feel like they're adding value to. So let me start with an example outside the U.S., or actually just across the border. It's on the border of Mexico and the United States. There's an area called Maquiladora, and Maquiladora just means manufacturing area. Manufacturing companies that import material and equipment, and they get it duty-free, so they're not paying any duty. Then they assemble or process or manufacture something, and then they export it primarily back to the country where they actually got the materials, sometimes to other places. But there are few regulations. The Mexican government has very few regulations in terms of taking care of employees, taking care of the environment. So there really is very little, like we have the Environmental Protection Agency to do that. Mexico really doesn't have anything even approaching the EPA. So the workers aren't protected, and the communities close by are not protected. This is a picture of one company, Metales de Derivados. It was a battery recycling facility, and it closed its door. And when it closed its door, it left this huge heap of toxic waste. The waste leached into the water and actually polluted several small villages that were downstream from this factory. And the result was what is known as encephaly. And what encephaly is that babies are born actually with no brain, or very little, maybe a stem, but no consciousness, nothing. And these villages had a 100 times higher rate of encephaly than other villages in Mexico. Less dramatic, but still a good example. And that most of us are familiar with, so coming now into the U.S., is our good friends at Walmart. 118.2 billion with a B revenue last year. Let's think about that. If Walmart were a country, its revenues would make it equal with the 25th largest economies in the world. And that actually surpasses the wealth of 157 smaller countries. So it's like its own country in a lot of ways, economically. They employ 2.1 million people. Average pay from $4 to $11 an hour. In the United States alone, the company employs 1.4 million people. That's 1% of the entire U.S. 140 million working population. So this is a massive company. A lot of us are aware that when Walmart moves into a company, an area, to a town, the company drives out the mom and pop businesses. We've heard this over and over again. But what a lot of people don't understand or realize is that the presence of Walmart actually does little to bolster the economy of local communities in the long run. Local communities, in effect, actually lose when Walmart moves in. They don't gain because Walmart spreads its money out internationally, not locally. Over 60% of Walmart goods come from overseas suppliers. Let me say that again. The idea behind Walmart was U.S. made only. When Walmart first started, you couldn't buy anything in that store unless it had been made in the U.S. Now, 60, and some people even say higher, 70% of everything they sell is made outside the United States. So they don't abide by international child labor laws, nor do they pay women the same as men that are doing exactly the same job. And this is in the U.S. I'm not talking about Mexico or China. This is right here in the U.S. So let's talk about toys now. I think Walmart sells Legos. So Legos. What is it about Lego company? Lego is actually a stakeholder company. The company that makes, obviously, Legos. Lego beat all other companies in the perception that it behaves ethically, that it conducts business fairly, and operates very transparently. It protects the environment and it supports worthy causes, like it has a corporate social responsibility. Lego has enhanced its corporate social responsibility through a couple of programs. One is called Build for Change, and one is called Sustainable Materials Center. So what they do is when they buy material, they make sure that the organizations that they buy the materials from are also sustainable. And we're going to talk more about sustainability later. It's a Danish company, and they really push for this idea of sustainability. Even small businesses, I've talked about large businesses, but even small businesses can be socially responsive by addressing their stakeholders. There's a fashion startup called Junto. It's designed a shoe that's inspired by traditional Ecuadorian canvas shoe. For each pair sold, Junto donates a supply-filled backpack to an at-risk Ecuadorian child to help him or her participate more fully and effectively in school. And this is a small company that's doing this. And a little larger company called Tom Shoes, you may have heard of them, but they match every pair of shoes that is bought from them with a new pair of shoes for a child in need internationally. This is called their one-for-one program. To date, they've given over 60 million pairs of shoes to children in need across the world. They didn't have to do this. It's part of their corporate culture. It's part of their idea of sustainability. And again, we're going to talk more about sustainability. There was an artist, and she also was a mother, named Rebecca Perugine. She began selling what she called her whimsical wall art for kids. And she did posters and cards and things like that. And she was promoting environmental education for children. She was using recycled materials, eco-friendly ink, that sort of thing, biodegradable packaging, things like that, for her original designs. And this is a small company called Children Inspired Design. They sell handcrafted paper goods, ornaments, things like that. But they're made by a women's cooperative in Mexico. And these special posters are sold. All the proceeds go back to the communities in Mexico. And also part of that money goes to what is called their Global Alliance for Improved Child Nutrition. So this woman who owns this small company decided that not only did she want to make a couple of bucks, she decided that she would use some of her profits to help children in need throughout the world. And again, this is a small company. Another one, and you might have seen this on a show on TV called Shark Tank. This is called the Elephant Pants Company. They sell, obviously, pants, but also accessories, cardigans, dresses, and things like that. It's made in Chiang Mai, Thailand, by a team that's paid twice the minimum wage in that area. Most products are made with bright fabrics, as you can see, and they have elephants on them. And the reason it's called the Elephant Pants is the company donates $1 for every product sold and has donated more than $150,000 to organizations dedicated to saving elephants throughout the world. So let's think about this idea of small company, because most people work for small to medium-sized companies anymore. Most people don't work for large organizations. Let's say you work for a small business. Let's say it's a small retail business. Let's say it's a coffee shop. Okay? Kind of like Starbucks, but small. Let's say there's 5 employees, counting the owner. As an employee, let's think about this for a minute. To whom are you responsible as an employee? Well, sure, you're responsible to the owner, but what about other employees? How are you responsible to them? Now, think about the customer, people that come in and buy your coffee. How are you responsible to them? Now, what about the community that company does business in? What responsibility do you as an employee have to the community? Do you think you have any? Now, let's think about stakeholders again. What does your responsibility to the owner look like? What is it that you do on a regular basis that adds value to the owner? Sure, you help the owner make profit, right? Obviously. But how do you do that? Well, you could show up on time, be ready to go to work, ensure that the coffee house is clean, that sort of thing. Now think about the people you work with. To what extent are you responsible to them? You can have a positive attitude. You can lend a hand. And during busy times, you might fill in for an employee who has a sick child. We focus a lot on customers, obviously, with for-profit businesses. But what extent are you responsible to them? How are you as an employee responsible to your customer? Again, things like positive attitude when you're waiting on them. You might make it a habit of thanking them for coming in and telling them that you appreciate their business. Now, what about the community that this coffee shop does business in? What does the business you work for do to be responsible to that local community? What are some things that you can do to build the reputation and social responsibility of this organization? You might, for example, help sponsor a pet day, where customers could adopt a dog or a cat, or you could place flyers and other materials, up on the walls in the coffee house in support of positive local events. And the last thing that we've talked about in terms of stakeholder is the environment, the ecosystem. Does your company have a responsibility to the ecosystem, to the environment? What can your coffee company do, and what can you do to help sustain the environment, to not pollute, to reduce waste, things like that, to recycle? What about fair trade? You ever heard of fair trade? To use fair trade beans and sustainable paper products instead of things like styrofoam cups, and paper or wood instead of plastic straws and spoons. These are just some simple things that even a small business can do to make a difference. But it's a difference in what it's like to work there, a difference in how customers view the company, and how it can enhance their loyalty as well as the employees' loyalty. A difference in the company's standing in the community, how the community sees that organization. Is it seen as a good community partner or not? And a difference in the physical impact the company has, not only on that community, but on the environment. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about the outcomes of stakeholder theory. The next video, we're going to look at corporate social responsibility and the triple bottom line.